Texas, Texas Senate votes to remove required lessons on civil rights. And I mean, the I Have a Dream speech would be dropped as class requirement. Uh, it stalled until the Democrats came back from being out of state. But it's like that is much more likely the thing that this is moving toward is, banning any sort of discussion, discourse,
Yeah.
ideology, I guess. I mean,
Yeah. So in Texas right now, I think it passed the Senate. I think the
yeah.
Texas Democrats in the House are still in DC, so that's the reason why it's probably not gonna move forward. I don't think they're coming back before August the 6th. But I mean, to your point, Nick, like this is actually not a conversation about the radical left. This is a conversation about completely erasing certain things from history books. And I mentioned the story of my grandfather before, and this is the story of Juneteenth. That was Galveston, Texas. They held slaves 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and so this is the state now that doesn't want to talk about it. Like, of course they don't. Like, they've denied all this stuff since one of the greatest inflection points in our nation's history, which was the Emancipation Proclamation and the subsequent war. So, the fact that Texas is moving in that direction is not only concerning, it is awfully ironic that they would be the state who's taken this next big push to say not only are we banning conversation, but we're literally gonna take things out of history books that are, again, Martin Luther King definitely seen as a radical by many in the South in the 1950s and 60s. But Martin Luther King is not necessarily anymore the most polarizing figure. I mean, everybody can, I mean, the more people hear about some of the other things he said, maybe so, but he is more commonly believed to be, a great American in history, and has a monument on the National Mall. So, like, that's
Yeah.
the guy who you don't want to learn about anymore. Like, really? The guy who has a big statue on the National Mall? I think the only one who's not a president that does. Like, we're going to erase him out of history books? Like, come on now.
Yeah. Well, or they want to erase the parts where he asked for, you know, actual concessions. I mean, they want to erase the
Well,
parts, like they
literally,
want a sterilized version of it.
literally, the thing that I think I saw in the article, and maybe it was mentioned in the article, and maybe not in the legislation, was specifically taking out learning about the I Have a Dream speech, which is commonly held as like one of the great speeches in American history. We're not talking about speeches that he made against the Vietnam War, or speeches that he made about income inequality. We're not even talking about those. We're talking about the I Have a Dream speech, like the one that Republicans on the House floor always quote, about the content of your character and everything. That's the one. That's the one that we're picking to take out of history books. Like, come on, guys. What are we doing here?
So let me see about other questions. So I think one of the other aspects of this that's been, again, we touched on earlier, and like these laws are going through kind of everywhere. So in Missouri, there was a hearing about a similar law. No black parents, teachers, or scholars invited to Missouri hearing on teaching race. And again, reference the Washington Post opinion piece where, in Oklahoma, we didn't. The only people that really spoke out about it at the state board meeting were black folks. But this idea that like we aren't listening to the people who say they have a problem with this, and being an organizer and just it's really informed my politics is like when so many people say the same thing, like I tend to believe them, right? I mean, it's like if I might not understand the concept, or I might not have had that experience, or I might not have seen it with my own eyes, but when everybody from like certain backgrounds or a bunch of folks say the same thing over and over, like I tend to believe them because that isn't coming from nowhere. Like that is a experience that they have, that they feel, that they understand. So like I wonder about like how that's going to play out in our classrooms, and how do we push that, or give space for folks to be able to speak out and kind of share their truth on these sorts of topics.
I mean, I guess the only thing is specifically for students, maybe leaning on one another and like private organizations or even campus sponsored ones, and maybe leading the discussion itself, because the way the rules are written and including like the accreditation part, it talks about teachers more so leading the discussions. I think, I don't know how, I mean, it's still very broad, so I don't know if like if the students let it, the teacher could comment, or if they just have to say mute if they want to keep their job. But I think, especially with the type of students that we have now, the Gen Zers, I think we would already want to have those discussions. So I think it would just kind of fall more on us, which is very sad that falls on teenagers and young adults. But I think that's kind of the only way to get around it, at least, and from what I've read of it and understand of it.
I think that's 100% right. I mean, that would be my comment as well, and I think it tracks right. Every major movement anywhere around the world was started by folks who were young, and because people who are older hold very formal power, and changes to that power have to come from somewhere else. And I think this is a time for students to lean in. I think educators, or at least school districts and universities, have to create the space and provide the forum. But young people can lean in on this. I think more than anybody else, they have a greater stake in what this country looks like long term, because they're going to be here longer than everybody else, right? So I think this is the opportunity for young people to really step up. It is not fair that this is all this weight of the past is going to be put on the shoulders of folks who are, teenagers and maybe a little bit older. But that's the way great movements have always been. They've always come from, even the Arab Spring, right? Started with young people. I remind people that, we were just talking about Martin Luther King was in his early 20s at the time of the Montgomery bus boycott, I believe. So, like, these movements start with young people. If you think about all the protests last summer after George Floyd, very peaceful protests, I might add, very different from January 6th, but which were a lot of older people who decided to kill police officers. But in this case, it was young people out front. And I think young people are watching and understanding, and I think they whether teachers participate or not. I think that young people are the way that we begin to have these conversations, and we sustain that change over time. Younger people are running for office now, doing all the things, but I think having these conversations in school and elsewhere are going to be super important. So I think she's absolutely right. I think it's going to have to be on the shoulders of folks sitting in the desk in the classroom, maybe not the person at the front of the classroom.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I remember at the teacher walkout, the best speeches given at the outdoor stage were from students. And like, what's funny is like they realize firsthand that underfunding our education, paying our teachers dead last in the country, trying to apply to get into a good school or be prepared for a good job, like that they are not, and that it is a direct result of our crap system of education that we perpetuate in Oklahoma. And so I feel like they feel similarly about this. I mean, they're not stupid. They can see that if a teacher says overtly obnoxious, racist, ahistorical stuff, that's not true, that there are other books out there that they can read. But it really is unfortunate that we are passing laws to protect fragile adults that don't want to engage in honest conversation. Well, I'm trying to think if I've got other things. I mean, what do we see? Are there things, that the teachers and administrators can do? I mean, you mentioned Dr. Gist in Tulsa. I mean, I would love to see more local boards standing up, but I don't know. What is the feeling about trying to challenge this stuff?
I mean, I think that I mean I hope the feeling I hope people are encouraged to challenge it. Like this is like things like this. It takes a lot of courage to push back on, and there's some risks associated with that. But just because certain people have the majority and they do things like this doesn't make it right or acceptable. And I think the pushback has to be there. And you know, I'm not suggesting that people go and go all the way to the other side and talk about how horrible white people are or anything like that. Like that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about just an accurate telling of what has happened in the past and some honest conversation about what it means today and what we do about it in the future. That's really at the heart of it, and I think that should have the freedom to do right, as opposed to feeling like they have to have any level of fear. So I hope that this is a time where very courageous educators and school administrators and colleges and universities step up and say, look, we have a greater obligation to the future, and we have to make sure we make good on that obligation by making sure we're doing our job in the classroom today. So that's come from everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, like people talk about what topics are getting taught, and like everyone wants to get real specific with it, which I think is just dishonest because they like we brought up that like Texas, they're trying to pull Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech out.
The one thing that's really
Yeah.
interesting about all the folks who talk about the classroom being uncomfortable and that kind of stuff, I always say, imagine what it's like to be Black in a classroom where administrators and teachers are white and that kind of stuff. And not saying that's a problem, but say like you're surrounded by folks who look different than you are, which happens quite commonly for a lot of Black students. And these conversations pop up, right? These aren't necessarily super comfortable conversations for Black people either, right? I mean, so it's not that white people feel guilty and Black people feel awesome because white people feel guilty. No. These are hard conversations that we have to have now. So maybe when when you grow up and you become a teacher or a police officer or a politician, you have great context about and a great understanding of the person on the other side of whatever decision that you're making. And I think you can draw a lot of what we see that's negative, whether it be the relationship between police and members of the community, the things we see in education, the overuse by some people of the N word, right? Like so many of those things, if we had great and honest conversations, probably wouldn't happen. And so, like, this is not just about like a feeling that people have. This is legitimately how we make policy better in our communities. There's a huge, there's a couple of legislators now in the House. This is a big issue nationally. A lot of people don't talk about, but it's infant and maternal mortality rates amongst people of color. What we know about health outcomes is not just that people think that Black people have worse outcomes. A lot of times women go and they have to have an advocate for them because physicians don't believe them when they say something is wrong.
Yep.
Um,
I mean,
so
Serena Williams. Having Serena Williams, like
right,
one of
so
the most
like those things,
powerful women in the
things
world.
change, right? But
Yeah.
if you don't think that foundationally doesn't happen because we don't do this kind of stuff in education early, you are wrong. People die because we don't have these kind of conversations. So it's not an abstract deal.
Yeah.
This is literally kids understanding at an early age and being able to, as they mature, understand like how things work and how do I really understand, how do I have some cultural competency around the person across me, even though they look differently, think differently, believe differently, maybe have a different faith than I do. How do I see them from a human standpoint? And sometimes you have to go through some of these critical conversations to do that. And so for me, the reason why this stuff is so important, it's not just a question of civil liberties. It's not just a question of accurate history. It is about saving lives over the long haul, because I think we can draw so much of that, whether it be in the area of medicine, criminal justice, whatever the case may be. So much of it is the fact that we don't do this currently, and now we're going to even go further in the wrong direction.
I definitely agree. Just thinking about like being able to like like I'm in the phase of like becoming my own woman, becoming an adult, and realizing how important it is to like the foundations of being able to form an argument is having facts, understanding both sides, even if there's a little bit of gray area. And when you're not provided with that and you're force fed kind of a watered down, like very whitewashed, omitted version of like history, it ruins your chances of being able to become an independent adult with informed decisions. And I think that's really important considering we have a really low literacy rate in Oklahoma, and that directly affects people's ability to just like function as an adult and like participate in civic engagement and just, you know, like just like everyday life decisions are informed by your ability to participate in a classroom where you're given facts and allowed to discuss those facts. And when you take that away, then I like just everyday decision, just like being able to like, you know, think about like bills and like budgeting, like you need to be able to have a like strong foundation. When you take that away, that's so dangerous, especially for people who don't have the resources to, you know, dig them out of a hole. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's an excellent point. To just respond to some of the stuff, the back and forth in chat, like I think to me what's dangerous about the whole like show me the specifics where it says, because like again these laws are worded in such a way that if you read it like it maybe sounds a little innocuous. Like I think we have to keep moving the bar. Like I'm going back to Representative Nichols' comments about, you know, the outcomes that we currently have. Like you can just chalk that up to racist notions about certain cultures or stereotypes you have, or you can learn the history of the country in a slightly different way and say that, damn, maybe because we kept people slaves for hundreds of years and then put them under Jim Crow, or because, I mean, I've even had personal experience with like Asian immigrants and how different, if you came from a country fleeing, you know, conflict, your chances as a successful Asian immigrant are very different than if you immigrated here as a wealthy person going to college with your parents' money and some initial investment. Like, but because of stereotypes, we're just like, Asians are good at math or whatever. You know, like people believe really stupid stuff about race because they are not taught and not allowed to have these conversations at an earlier age, more widely. And I think that's where, I mean, I don't think you can get into this, like, well, where does it specifically say that you're not allowed to learn this concept? It's like, man, look at America. Like, just have a conversation with somebody that doesn't look like you, and you will immediately understand, like, oh, damn, yeah, I did not learn that. Or, you know, I could maybe adjust my perspective a little bit, and that would be okay. And it costs me basically nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, to that point, you know, 1775, this point you're making is essentially a reinforcement of all those stereotypes, right? Like, Black people are more dangerous and are more unhealthy and all that kind of stuff. And that's the reason why Black people have a shorter life expectancy, don't have the wealth of white people. They don't want to work hard. Like that would be the assumption that people would be forced to make unless you are having conversations about how we got here, right? And so like it is really interesting to me that the bill says we want to make sure that we're not teaching that one race is superior to the other, but the actual impact of the bill would be to codify in law that one race is actually pretty superior. It has all the money and is, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? So like, you know, what they say in the bill, the impact of it is completely different. And I would say sometimes people have this deal between impact and intent.
Right.
I think that was the intent, and that is absolutely the impact. And so, you know, it's really interesting that they found a way, which they always find ways to do this kind of stuff, right? To say we really want to do this thing over here, but in actuality, they are upholding this idea of white supremacy in America, which is you know, it's 2021, man. Like, you know, I'm not going to say the word that I want to say on your podcast, but like, what the heck, you know?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah. No, I mean, I've had the conversation with white friends. I mean, they really dislike the words white supremacy. Like, it makes them feel bad. And it's just like, then what other name would you give it? Like, I don't know. I mean, this is just the best word we've got and the definition we've got. And again, like maybe in an academic setting, you could learn about that and deal with your feelings on it later, like at home. I don't know.
Well, that's the deal, though. Like, I think that, the term white supremacy, I know it makes people uncomfortable. That's the reason why it should be a relic of the past. That's the reason why we have critical conversations about race, right? That's the reason why this particular bill is so problematic, because it is, codifying white supremacy. It's codifying the legacy of segregation. And in Texas, it's actually codifying the fact that any of that stuff was morally wrong. Like it is crazy until, like, for me, like white supremacy makes me uncomfortable too, by the way. I'm not white. The term like scares me slightly, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so like and that's the reason why I think it's important for white folks to step up and talk about how bad this stuff is as well, because I have obviously a lot of white friends who believe very differently than people believed in the past. And I think if we found ourselves in the same place we were in a couple 100 years ago, those people would believe differently than people did then. And so, like, these are not folks who care about upholding white supremacy. So yes, I'm glad it makes them feel uncomfortable, but we all, and white people in particular, have to understand that's why you have to be frontline advocates against stuff like this, right? It can't just be a bunch of black people and brown people and that kind of stuff. You have to be in the front of the line too, and say, like, look, that ain't who we are as a country. That's not what we are. That's not what we're doing. We can't let that stuff go just because we don't believe that we're impacted, because they are.